So the materials for this video will be this Vintage Simplicity 4827 pattern. This is a maternity pattern, and some white taffeta, and I'll be using, I think, about 12 of these really pretty shank buttons. They kind of have like that pearl finish with like a gold trim on it, and so we'll be going with that. And I did get a comment under my last video asking if I do adjustments or alterations to my patterns in order to fit. And the answer to that is yes, just not in my maternity patterns, because my stomach is always growing. I don't really make adjustments because who knows what I'll, like at this point, I think I'm supposed to be gaining like 5 pounds a week or something like that, or 2 pounds, I have no idea. But like growing at that rate, there's no sense in adjusting it now when it may not fit like next week. So I do tend to leave those patterns exactly the way that it is.
So these are the 3 main pattern pieces for this dress. We have the back, which is 2 pieces. We have the side panels, which is another 2 pieces. And then we also have the front that is cut on the fold. I'll be starting off with the front of this pattern. I'll be marking the darts as well as putting the marks on for the other pieces that goes on it, like the tab and the pockets. Now, I want to mention with this pattern, I was missing about 4 pattern pieces. So it did add a little bit of time on this project because I did have to draft the pockets, the 2 neck facing pieces, and then I did reach out to an Etsy seller who kindly photocopied the tab and sent it to me in an email. So I did have quite a bit to do before I could even get started with this project. As you can see, I'm putting very light dots on the fabric because I wasn't sure if it was going to remove or come off. And I did do a test piece, but like something about working with a special occasion fabric made me really nervous. So it did come off on my test piece, but I still was extra careful by dotting my lines as opposed to drawing them just in case. So now, during the process of marking the pleats, I did fall into an old habit and use a very fine, thin, light mark of a pencil. And this was because I was still super nervous about the whole disappearing ink pen. And I just want to say that before I even started this project, I did tests on scrap, how it would react to heat, how it would react to my disappearing ink pen, also to check the tension of my sewing machine to make sure it didn't buckle or leave holes, and use the right needle. So I do recommend that you use a test strip for everything you plan on doing with your fabric before you get started. So now on to my first bound buttonhole, and this is done on the tab. I actually practiced this a couple times on this fabric just to see what heat setting I could use to get the best results, because when you're doing bound buttonholes, it's best to iron, like that's how you get the best results. But since you can only use a low heat, I wanted to see how much I could push it, since there was interfacing on it, to see if there was any sort of protection before I moved forward. So I did about 3 or 4 practice tries just to see what the best results would be before I went on. And so now I'm just cutting out the holes, and then I do most of this off camera just because it's so much easier for me to see what I'm doing and get the best results when I'm not sharing space with the camera. So now I'm adding the facing to the tab. So this is right sides together, and then I'm gonna flip it inside out. And I want to tell you guys that I lined the tab with a poly cotton as opposed to the taffeta because I wanted to be able to press it a little bit more and get those sharp crisp edges. And I did the same thing with the pockets as well. So now I'm marking the pocket and the tab placement, and then as you can see, I'm back to using small dots with my disappearing ink pen. So this fabric is also prone to holes, so I do recommend that you use very sharp pins because you don't want to leave any snags in the fabric. Also make sure that you file your nails and you don't rub it up against anything that might leave any kind of snags or runs in the fabric. You just want to be extra careful. So at this point, you definitely want to tack your pattern pieces on, but you want to be as careful as possible when it comes to working on it, because the last thing you want is to leave a bunch of holes and marks and snags in your finished product, especially when you're working with something like this that's taking a lot more of your time. Now I'm adding French seams to the side panels. I decided to do this because the taffeta is prone to fraying, but also when I was done, I realized that it held that pleat or the crease very well. So it definitely worked out in the end, and I would recommend that if you made a dress like this that you did French seam it as opposed to serging. But I did a practice run on the serger, and the serger did very well with it. It didn't snag or buckle or do anything like that. So I did end up serging a couple pieces to reduce some bulk, but most of it I did with French seams. Okay, so this is my stopping point. I wanted to wait to take this video with natural lighting. I have my pockets and tabs on, as well as the side panels, which I did with French seams. So now I am putting dots where I want to add a guide for the buttonholes. I do this with light dots, but I will go back, as you can see in the next clip, with some thread and do a basting stitch as a guide, so that way I can keep all of my buttonholes aligned. Usually, if I was working with a very iron safe fabric, I would put a crease in the fabric with the iron to do this, to avoid adding any additional holes or markings on the fabric. But because this fabric is so sensitive to heat and pretty much everything, I decided to do this basting stitch instead. So now I'm carefully marking each of the buttonholes individually. There'll be 8 of these, and I do this as lightly as possible because even though throughout this process I've noticed that the water soluble pen does go away, there's just something about the fact that it couldn't that makes me a little nervous, since this is supposed to be a special dress. All the tabs are on, So I'm going to go ahead and start adding the buttonholes, and I'll do a couple of the process on screen, but I do majority of it off camera just because it makes it easier for me to see, not having to share visual space with the camera.
Okay, so this is where we are. I still need to hem the bottom, attach the sleeves, and put the facing on the neck. This is the back, so the buttonholes are on. I just have to add the buttons to everything and then try and get as good of a press as I can. I think the most frustrating thing with this fabric is you can't use high heat, and low heat does next to nothing to get the wrinkles out. So it's been very, very frustrating, but I'm almost done, so I'm gonna see this project through.
So now for the finishing touches, and that's to add all of the buttons. So with this dress, I decided not to sew a hem on, neither by machine or by hand with a blind stitch, and instead I decided to use a hem tape, so that way I could get as smooth of a finish as possible, because every little kink or bend or wrinkle shows in this fabric, and I wanted it to be as smooth as possible. So now the dress is complete. This is the dress on the dress form. It does have a couple wrinkles in it because I did wear it prior to putting it back on the dress form, and every time you take this dress off, you pretty much have to press it or it'll get a wrinkle just from you walking around and shifting in it. So now I'm going to take you over to the sleeve, where I show you how I finished it with the hem tape to avoid having those little pin pricks or polka dots from the blind hem, as well as the hem on the bottom of the dress. So I appreciate you guys so much for watching this video. Thank you. Don't forget to like and subscribe, as well as follow me on Instagram so you can see my work or see what I'm up to in real time. Again, thank you so much for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share. See you in my next one.